Hello, everyone. My name is Marine Hoda, and this is AJ Tornator. On behalf of Concord Carlisle for Informed Dialogue, we really want to thank you all for being here. We really appreciate seeing all of you. As you all know, the focus of today's event is on the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism and its implication for free speech and specifically political speech. As many of you know, the IHRA definition has been the subject of much discussion, both nationally and locally. In our local community, there are many valued members of the community who feel that the IHRA definition provides much needed clarity around speech and conduct that should be deemed anti-Semitic. And at the same time, there are many valued members of the community that believe that the IHRA definition has a chilling effect on much needed dialogue about Palestine and Palestinian human rights. So, I've said the IHRA definition a few times. Let's take a step back and just review the text so we're all on the same page. The IHRA definition, the entire definition and its examples is quite long, so we divided it into 2 slides. So, as I mentioned, there's the actual definition, there's some additional language, and then there are the guiding examples. So the definition is the 3 lines after the word definition, and I'm going to read it. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. In addition to the definition, there are also 11 guiding examples, the slide emphasizes a couple specific examples. Many of the examples pertain to speech about Israel, and the slide emphasizes a couple examples that are directed to shielding Israel from certain speech. The emphasis is ours, it's not in the original. So, for example, the 7th example describes claiming that the state of Israel is a racist endeavor as being an example of contemporary anti-Semitism. The 8th example, applying double standards by requiring of Israel a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. Many of you might wonder the specific relevance of this definition to Concord Carlisle and why we're having this talk ambitiously in the Concord Carlisle auditorium. Well, in a brief filed with the Department of Education, the Anti-Defamation League, or the ADL, asked that the district, Concord Carlisle District, incorporate the IHRA definition and its guiding examples into its policy and policy manuals. In addition, the State Commission on Combating Anti-Semitism, which is part of the Massachusetts legislature, urged Massachusetts educators to be, quote, informed of and by the IHRA definition and its guiding examples. In making their recommendations, both the ADL and the State Commission acknowledged that there are free speech considerations associated with implementing the IHRA definition and the examples. And the focus of today's forum is on that specific issue and on exploring the implications of the IHRA definition and its examples on free speech, and specifically in schools and in the classroom. So a couple questions. If the IHRA definition and its examples were incorporated into school policies and policy manuals and how discrimination is interpreted by educators, what speech would be impacted? Going back to the examples, if we focus on example 8, just as an example, who would decide if a critical statement made by a student, for example, a Palestinian student, is within example 8, applying double standards by requiring of Israel a behavior not expected or demanded by any democratic nation? If speech within the examples, and the highlighted examples, is deemed anti-Semitic and therefore amounts to discrimination or harassment of a student, what consequences would there be for the student or educators? What impact would implementation of the IRA definition and the examples have on dialogue in our community about Palestine and Israel? And lastly, who would be impacted most? So to explore the implications of incorporating the IRA definition, we're very excited to have a wonderful panel here today. We will be introducing each speaker more thoroughly, but I just want to mention we have Professor Hasia Diner, Professor Ben Idelson, Sue Doherty, Sarah McKinnon, and our own Rachel Gore-Fried. I want to just take a moment and acknowledge and express gratitude at the front to Jennifer Bell, who organized this entire program and who did all the work organizing the speakers today. We also want to express our thanks to Margaret Litvin for being so generous with her time and advice. And a big thank you to all the volunteers today. Before introducing our first speaker, I'm going to turn it over to AJ to review some of the norms for today's forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to be reading the norms for today's forum. There will be a question and answer session at the end. We're not taking live questions, but there are these cards that have been distributed to you. If you don't have any, just wave your hand and we'll bring one over to you. And write your questions on the card. We'll collect them at the end. There's a green bag there. We'll come over and collect those from your hands. Please listen carefully and respectfully. Our speakers have volunteered their time to be with us today, and they have traveled to be here, so let's honor their effort with our attention. Our goal here is to learn together. We're not attempting to solve or resolve anything today, and the event is recorded by the local public network, the Minuteman Media Network, and our hope is that it will be available afterwards on their YouTube channel. So it should be available for you afterwards. If you have not pre-registered and we want to be included in future events, there is going to be several sign-up sheets going around. Just wave over and one of us will come over and hand over these sign-up sheets to add your name and email there. But please, if you want to be included, write your email legibly. And please be respectful of other audience members, and please don't behave in a way that impedes anyone else's ability to see the slides or hear the speakers. So please, I'm not seeing any flags in the room, but I'll just say it. So please, no flags or signs or anything that obstructs the view in the auditorium. And also, please, no loud conversations in the auditorium, which could make it hard to hear the speakers. I think that's it. Thank you.
So it's my honor to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Hasia Diner. Hasia Diner is Professor Emerita at the Department of History and the Skirball Department of Hebrew and Judaic Studies at New York University. Professor Diner is also the director of the Goldstein-Gorin Center for American Jewish History and is also currently visiting professor of Jewish Studies at Harvard Divinity School. Among her many books, and there were too many for the interest of time, Hungering for America, Italian, Irish, and Jewish Foodways in the Age of Migration, The Jews of the United States, 1654 to 2000, and We Remember with Reverence and Love American Jews and the Myth of Silence After the Holocaust, 1945 to 1962. And I hope everyone will join me in welcoming Professor Diner to Concord and to the stage.
Can this be stationary? Yes. Great. Okay, great. Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me, and really it's an honor to be here. This is obviously very challenging questions, a very challenging situation. So in some ways, I think the IRA document has been very well presented already, and it's just important to note that the statement that was on the board there was not intended to be be a guide for legislative action or for public policy, but it was defined as a working definition rather than anything else. And the fact that this body wanted to have a working definition of anti-Semitism partly reflects the reality that scholars long have debated what is anti-Semitism. Okay, there has been no consensus as to what that means, how to define it, what acts or words fit into that category, who is an anti-Semite, a tremendous sort of scholarly debate about it. And so there have been over the years efforts to try to codify the word and to make it kind of clear and to crystallize it in a single place. And so this is just an attempt. Okay, it's nothing more than that, but under the set of historical circumstances, after it was first published in 2005, partly shaped by the State of Israel and American Jewish organizations. The ADL was mentioned before, but another very important body was the American Jewish Committee, is that it moved from this working definition into the public sphere and became widely broadcast to the public and became sort of defined as, or seen as, the gold standard of the many definitions as authoritative in and of itself, and upon which legislative bodies, institutions, schools, as we are now witnessing here in Massachusetts, thought that this is a way to make an impact upon the curriculum of schools. This is something that's not just in Massachusetts that it's such an issue. So the first question that I've been asked to talk about and that I will address now is, why was this so appealing to so many of these mainstream, very prominent American Jewish organizations, many of which have the ear of governmental bodies, which are considered to speak for the Jews? Okay, that is, many of these organizations like the ADL and the American Jewish Committee get called upon all the time by governments from the federal to the state to the local level, as well as non-governmental organizations, to the press, and they're asked, what do the Jews want? What do the Jews think? So these are the self-appointed spokespeople for the Jews. So why did they like this definition so much? Now, I want to begin by saying that it's not just them, but for many, and I cannot possibly put a number to it. Okay, there's just an uncountable number, unknowable number of American Jews who find something positive and comforting in this statement. And we can think about why they find it that way in a number of contexts. And first, let's keep in mind that the idea of a Jewish homeland, of a place to which the Jews might someday return, was kind of baked into Jewish theology and Jewish religion. Okay, I'm going to complicate that in a second, though, but certainly the liturgy that Jews would be familiar with in their synagogues and in home rituals made references to the idea of a place that they had once lived and which they yearned to go back to. So Jewish families in their homes at the Passover Seder will begin the Seder with a particular reading, and it says, this year we are here, and next year in the land of Israel. Okay, this is a document that probably comes from the 10th century. Okay, and the text, the Haggadah that is used at the Seder, ends with the words, next year in Jerusalem. Okay, Jewish synagogues are historically, and again since the beginning of the Common Era, okay, so the year one of the Common Era, oriented to face east, to face Jerusalem. And again, prayers consistently invoke the idea of the gathering of the exiles from the four corners of the world and lead them, they beseech God, upright to their homeland. So it's baked into a kind of liturgical, theological orientation, although it is really important to note that this may be purely metaphoric. Okay, and metaphoric because they also have, there is rhetoric in those same prayers and liturgical materials for the return of animal sacrifice at a temple in Jerusalem. Okay, and all sorts of other precepts that over the course of the millennia, 2 millennia of the existence of Judaism, was understood to not be actual, but to have deep symbolic meaning. So it's there. I mean, it is something that Jews were inculcated in their religious institutions. But I think more important and more practically, the IHRA definition is comforting and helpful because of the issues and the developments of modern Jewish history with the rise of anti-Semitism, particularly in the late 19th century, which gave birth to the Zionist movement. And from there, from the late 19th century to the rise of Nazism, the Holocaust, okay, the refugee crisis before the war began, and the hundreds and thousands of Jews in Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, who sought to flee Nazism and had no place to go. Okay, the United States has essentially shut its doors. All the other Western democracies as well had set up barriers to mass immigration. And where were they going to go? And so after the Holocaust and the destruction of 1/3 of the Jewish people, okay, the remnants of the Nazi onslaught were also faced with the question, where do we go? Don't want to go back to the places where we had been persecuted, and many of those countries indeed had come under communist rule. Poland, and probably the most important example, huge a spike in anti-Semitism in Poland in the late 1940s, right after the Germans are defeated. So Israel kind of emerges as both a reality in 1948 and as a deeply symbolic understanding of the antidote to the Holocaust, to the, it was in a sense the compensation. Okay, nobody helped us. Okay, now again, this is not the rhetoric I'm saying as a historian, but that was the rhetoric on the ground. Nobody helped us, and essentially the world owes it to us. So it's after the Holocaust that American Jewry, which had previously been very lukewarm to Zionism, okay, began to inch towards an embrace of the Zionist position, the idea that Jews had to have a homeland, had to have a state of their own. Communal agencies like the American Jewish Committee and the Anti-Defamation League and others began to reverse their previous disdain for Zionism, their antipathy for Zionism, and to become more open to that idea. And I'm just going to offer one little example because I only have 20 minutes. But in 1949, so a year after Israeli statehood, and again, just a few years after the end of the Holocaust, the chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary, the kind of center of American conservative Judaism, faced a rebellion among the graduating rabbinical students who wanted to sing the Israeli national anthem, the Hatikva, at the ordination ceremony. And he said, no, we are a Jewish institution, we are not a Zionist institution. Okay, the students rebelled, they got up and sang it, and Louis Finkelstein had no choice but to then allow it to go on. But it's a good example of this Zionization of American Jewish life. The trend towards the embrace of lock, stock, and barrel of the Zionist argument took on greater urgency, greater strength, greater vibrance after the 1967 war in Israel. So in this process, where what had been a theological principle and then a response to a historic crisis, okay, becomes the leitmotif of American Jewish life from the late 1960s onward. And in the process, the critics of Zionism, who were always there, okay, the critics, the Jewish critics of Zionism, the Jewish critics of Israel, who were always there and did not depart, were, however, marginalized and driven to the kind of corners of communal life. And so Jewish community councils, which had previously included within their ranks organizations that were either hostile to Zionism or didn't care about it, began to drive them out or exclude them from sitting on communal bodies. So this is, in a way, we might say, the Jewish context for understanding why for some, and again, not for all, IRA seems to be a fitting and appropriate way of thinking about this situation. Now, the comfort derived from IRA goes further, because many of those Jewish communal leaders, and again, I'm going to think about federations and Jewish community relations councils and the American Jewish Committee and the Anti-Defamation League and the Reform Movement and the Conservative Movement, and I'll come back to the Reform Movement in a second, are terrified. Okay, they became terrified starting in the late 1960s, after the Six-Day War, as criticism of Israel became more and more vocal. Okay, became audible in so many different sectors of American life, and also discourse outside of the United States. And while in the late 1960s it seemed to come from the margins of American society, from the New Left and from African American nationalists and the like, it began, that kind of criticism began to move closer and closer to the center of American life. Many of the mainstream Protestant denominations, for example, which had began to articulate some of the same kinds of ideas about the problem of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian lands, the plight of Palestinians, and the like. This may have come to a head in 1975 when the United Nations passed its Zionism as racism declaration. And so for many of the leaders, and perhaps rank and file, and again, we don't know their numbers, of American Jews, it became a really frightening situation that the world was turning on Israel. This gained even greater steam starting again in the late 1970s as young American Jews, okay, or American Jews, some of them young, some of them actually rabbis and educators, also began to say these things. So in the 1970s, an organization named Breira, which means alternative, okay, formed. And these were rabbis and Jewish educators who said, you know, we've got to talk to Palestinians. Palestinians are a people, and they have a legitimate cause, and we need to communicate with them. By the end of the 20th century, with the founding of organizations, and the early 21st, the founding of organizations like Jewish Voice for Peace, If Not Now, and a series of other Jewish organizations made up of both some older people, but mostly the rising generation who were articulating a sense that the Zionist rhetoric of the Jewish community and the what they saw as the slavish and obsessive following of the dictates or the mandates of the State of Israel was not the kind of Jewish community they wanted, and they envisioned and are very actively envisioning a new kind of Jewish reality, one in which Israel is not at the center as it had become, but a Judaism that is disconnected from that kind of Israel rhetoric. Now, I was also asked about in this context, the complexities that this poses for educators, for teachers at whatever level. And in the most powerful sense, besides the fact that in classrooms, unless one is teaching in a Jewish day school, there are going to be children and young people from a variety of backgrounds, some of whom may be Palestinian or come from families with origins in other Arab lands, for whom what IRA is asking teachers to do is going to be offensive. Okay, and that their story cannot be represented in the curriculum, and they cannot articulate their views of how they understand both the history and the reality. So it stymies teachers from responding to all the students in the class, because essentially, as IRA is being implemented in states, it is addressing the needs and fears and concerns of only one group of students. Now, in addition, and I as a historian particularly come down on the next comment, my next comment, which is using the IRA definition or any other similar document presents a false narrative of the past. It's teaching bad history, an inaccurate history. And I was thinking of what could be an analogy I might use. And so the one that I came up with, and here we are in Concord, and it would be saying that all Americans supported the revolution. Okay, well, we know that wasn't true. John Adams said a third were for it, a third were against it, and a third didn't care. Okay, but if one is teaching history to students at whatever level, and you said all Americans supported the revolution, you're teaching them a false narrative about the past. And so, too, the IRA definition requires then that teachers present a vision, an understanding of the past which was historically flawed, because not all Jews supported Zionism or supported the establishment of the State of Israel. From the Reform, okay, who very clearly defined themselves as we are not a nation, we do not have any interest in going back to any homeland, okay, to some of the most orthodox, some of the most pious elements within the Orthodox community, the Agudat Yisrael. So Zionism, one Agudat Yisrael rabbi said, is the same as Satanism. Okay. And then those Jews who were deeply concerned with the fate of the Jewish people here in the United States and abroad, and who were very eager to support the flourishing of Jewish culture, also said, we don't want to go back. We don't want the Jews to go back to someplace else. We want them to have a safe and flourishing status here in the United States, or England, or France. Okay, we might refer to this as the integrationist position. But from the Orthodox to the Reform to the integrationist, there were many Jews who did not support the idea of Zionism and were very lukewarm even about the rise of the State of Israel after 1948. So as such, to just draw this to a close, what the IRA definition asks teachers to do is teach a history that didn't exist. And I, as a teacher, believe that it has been my really sacred job to teach the best I could, and that would be that any subject has multiple sides and has multiple ways of being understood. And actors, there was no one set of actors in the past on any issue, but any population contained within it a variety, a kaleidoscope of positions, and we need to teach the kaleidoscope and not just the one color. So thank you. Should I go there or back?
Thank you, Professor Diner. And now I have the honor of introducing our next speaker, Professor Ben Idelson. Oh, is Sarah next? Oh. Oh, okay. Apologies, our next speaker. I have the honor of introducing our next speaker. The real next speaker is Sarah McKinnon, who is a member and organizer with Arlington for Palestine, known for introducing and advocating for a ceasefire resolution at the Arlington Town Meeting in May 2024. Despite the town officials ultimately voting no action on the measure, she and her colleagues highlighted the importance of urging their town government to address the humanitarian crisis. Sarah presented and spoke in favor of a resolution calling for an immediate permanent ceasefire in Gaza, hostage release, and humanitarian aid, arguing that town meetings are appropriate venues for such aspirational votes. Sarah, please take away.
We'll see how it goes.
All right.
It takes a second, I think. There we go.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? I'm managing multiple things at the same time, so thank you for your patience. As I was just so beautifully introduced, I'm Sarah McKinnon. I live in Arlington, where I'm a partner and a parent, probably first and foremost. Other ways I'm engaged in community is as an elected town meeting member, as was mentioned, and with the town's diversity task group. I'm also a community organizer with Arlington for Palestine, a supporter within the LUCE network, and a trained community safety marshal and legal observer. There's, of course, more to me than simply this, but for tonight, I'll locate myself in these ways. In response to the recently finalized recommendations by the Special Commission for Combating Anti-Semitism, Arlington for Palestine has partnered with concerned Jewish faculty and staff and Together for an Inclusive Massachusetts and others to share our concerns about the Commission's work with the public. As part of this process, we've invited folks in Arlington to attend small group information and conversation sessions, and everyone is welcome. Tonight, I've been invited to share a particular part of that process. First, a practice for grounding ourselves in our collective knowledge through sharing our values for education. And then I'll briefly outline the form that educational gag order laws and policies take as a way to frame these K-12 recommendations. So I want to begin with how we can ground ourselves with each other and, I'm sorry, I'm losing my spot, and what we collectively know. So I'm going to invite you to settle back and consider. Most likely, every person in this room has been through some kind of formalized education that is loosely called school. Now, I'll put a side note that I'm a homeschooling parent. My children don't go to school, and yet I would still consider them to be in a sort of school anyhow. Sorry. So, as a person who was a student, maybe is still a student, you hold that experience within you, in your body. And so, with care for yourself, there is no need to go really deep into the past here. You and I can ask ourselves, when I was a student, what worked? What was hurtful or harmful? What was fruitful? What did I know was absent and was needed? And now, as people in the context of your everyday lives today, living in this world right now, I think you and I can ask ourselves these very same questions. What's working? What's hurtful and harmful? What's fruitful? What do I think is absent? And what's needed? So I'm going to present to you a collection of what was offered by folks as their values for education as they held these questions in our various sessions. And what I'm asking you to observe or to feel in your body is what lights you up there? What's an easy yes for you? So if we were in a different, smaller format, we could explore that together. But what this process makes really visible in my experience is the overlaps that we share in our values with the others around us. It might be that curiosity is the first thing you saw. It's also first on the list, of course. But it could be that the ability to be intellectually uncomfortable is something that really lights up for you. When we can see and feel and experience this in real time and together, what we can recognize is that you and I hold or embody real knowledge, that we bring our own expertise, that there's an overlap of our knowledges, and there are differences and spaces, and that's relational. And so that surfaces or makes visible that we already know what we need collectively to guide us as we and our children address what is difficult and complex and uncertain. So holding that together, settling into that together, I'm now going to share a framework that I've found has been helpful for our orientation and analysis of what PEN America calls educational gag order laws. PEN America, very briefly, works to ensure that people everywhere have the freedom to create literature, to convey information and ideas, to express their views, and to access the views, ideas, and literatures of others. If you want to learn more about their work and read some of their reports and analysis, I highly encourage you to check out their site at pen, as in the writing instrument, PEN.org. In the past few years, in America, an increasing number of laws, legislations, sets of policies have been introduced in most states, seeking to restrict the teaching of race, racism, gender, DEI, ethnic studies, American history, and more, citing particular topics as, say, divisive, controversial, polarizing, and thus, by implication, harmful. The form this takes is to use vague language and boundaries on one hand, and suggest vague but escalating consequences for transgression on the other. And what emerges in between these two forces is a culture creation that is chilling. So educational gag orders can be an outright ban, or they can be far more vaguely prescriptive. They often have vague language. It can have very specific definitions, but mixed in with broad associations with, say, terrorism or the radical left or the woke agenda. It also has very vague boundaries around it. So these policies and legislations may apply to curricular choices and approaches that teachers make and school districts approve, such as an anti-racist framework or ethnic studies. But these restrictions may also apply to the conversations that spontaneously emerge within the classroom and in the hallway and in the schoolyard and between colleagues and perhaps beyond and off campus on social media, where folks may serve in other roles besides teacher, educator, or student. So this is, on one hand, is this vagueness, and on the other side is this escalating consequences for transgression. So this could start with surveillance, such as setting up anonymous snitch lines for teachers, students, staff, parents, and community members to report on each other, perhaps for problematic curriculum or biased speech in the classroom or in the hallway, in an assignment, or outside of the school, again, say on social media. So this results in removing local autonomy, transparency, and accountability, and sending these anonymous reports to distant authorities in appointed and unaccountable committees at the state level and to state police and their special investigative units. We don't know how this information will be stored, classified, analyzed, applied, shared with other bodies, say the FBI, ICE, immigration services, current and future employers, lobby and special interest groups, or private industry. And in the immediate term, we see and sense the higher consequences, which we're witnessing in real time all around us. Public censure, suspension, probation, job loss, blackballing, doxing, and even in more extreme, criminalization, which can look like detention, arrest, deportation, revocation of visas, and we know that this disproportionately impacts Black and brown folks. So on one side, we have vague and uncertain restrictions. And on the other side, we have this growing threat of highly impactful consequences for transgression. And so what happens in this highly uncertain middle space? Generally, and understandably, out of caution, people avoid talking about any issues or ideas that could possibly be covered, whether or not they're mentioned in these laws. And because students don't know what they can say, and teachers don't know what they can teach, people err on the cautious side and just end up saying or teaching, or teaching anything that might cross this ambiguous line. So I want to return us to where we began and where we were grounded. Our values for education exercise is one way of recognizing that we all belong, we all bring knowledge, and that holding this together cultivates a culture that strengthens our children's skills and abilities to live in a complex world with mutual dignity. Does the culture created by educational gag order laws, this chilling effect of self-censorship, nurture and support our students and educators? Or rather, does this leverage and weaponize our fears, turn us on our teachers, educators, and students, treating them as suspects and not partners and community members? I hope that this can be helpful for you, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Sue Doherty, offering her perspective as a teacher. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And our next speaker is Sue Doherty, former English teacher and school librarian. Sue Doherty is a librarian and English teacher with a history of working in the public and non-profit education sector. She's an education professional with advanced degrees in secondary education and in school library and media. She has spoken out against the discriminatory trend of defunding school library programs in K-12 schools across the nation and the adverse effects of this trend on student learning and critical thinking skills. Sue is also a member of the Massachusetts Teacher Association Union. Thank you, Sue. The floor is yours.
Good evening, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak tonight. Before I begin discussing the problems the IHRA definition can cause in the K-12 classroom, which is what I was asked to speak about, I want to share a bit of my experience as an educator and how it has influenced the way I have come to understand and view the IHRA as both a tool of censorship and a form of racism. As you heard, I'm a career educator. I spent 35 years teaching diverse groups of students, starting in Boston in GED program, ending in Needham in a middle school in a library. In between then, I taught a few other schools, but most of my career was spent at Brockton High School teaching English and library. I retired in 2023, which allows me to speak freely here tonight without fear of retaliation at school. So that's a real thing. Most teachers would not feel comfortable addressing this topic, active teachers. When I was teaching in Needham, I witnessed with alarm the escalating wave of book bans occurring across the country that continue today, that Sarah was alluding to, the censorship that's been happening in the laws. Every year, the American Library Association publishes a list of the top 10 most frequently challenged books. They used to be challenged mostly for inappropriate language and sexual content. But starting in the mid-2010s, almost all the books that made the top 10 list contained stories of information dealing with race, dealing with race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. And most were also written by Black and LGBTQ plus authors. In the early 2020s, groups like Moms for Liberty started circulating lists of books online with out-of-context excerpts that people could use to try to get books banned. These lists caused challenges to escalate even more. So that was how I left. When I retired in 2023, that was the landscape in the library world, and the book banning and censorship. Then during the second month of the first year of my retirement, October 7th happened. Oftentimes during crises like these, educators will seek out age-appropriate materials they can use with students, knowing that students are impacted by the world around them outside of school. In November 2023, an educator I know reached out to me to ask me if I could pull together a list of books for K-12 teachers and students to help them to understand and navigate what was happening. So I did what I had always done, and I reached out to my library colleagues in the Mass School Library Association to see if anyone wanted to help me compile a list. We love making book lists. It's a fun thing for librarians. But it soon became apparent that this was not going to be one of those fun book lists, and it wasn't going to be easy to crowdsource. A few librarians suggested I should avoid including the picture book Homeland by Massachusetts Palestinian-American author Hannah Musabek. Then someone sent me a list of biased books that was posted on the Camera Education website, which is something I had never heard of, Camera Education Institute. I noticed, though, that 99.9% of the books on that list were by and or about Palestinians, and that most of the same books also appeared on highly recommended lists on the website Social Justice Books, which I trusted and frequently used. So that set off alarm bells. It reminded me of the list that Moms for Liberty circulate. It had, excerpts. It had, critiques that would-be censors could use to try to get books removed. So I told the person who sent me the list that this felt like censorship, and I didn't want to participate in censorship. We didn't end up finishing the list. It was just really hard to come to any kind of agreement about what should be on the list, but I continued to gather resources and share with people that I was going to have to argue with over censorship. And this is related tangentially because it includes information about an author who was actually on that list. In December 2025, the LA Public Library, so recently this happened, they canceled a scheduled talk for Read Palestine Week between Nora Lester Murad, whose young adult book, Ida in the Middle, is on that list, the camera list, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce these names, Janine Matari, author of a 2025 children's book, Everything Grows in Jiddo's Garden. Janine Matari is Palestinian-American, and Nora Lester Murad is a Jewish mother of Palestinian children. The program had been planned by the library's Teen Advisory Council, many of whom are K-12 students. There was pressure on the library to cancel the event, as is often the case when libraries host programs that include Palestine, and the director succumbed to that pressure. And that's happened here in Massachusetts a number of times where there's been challenges. People may have heard about what happened in Newton. I share this story because California recently passed legislation known as AB 715, which is supposed to be about preventing anti-Semitism in K-12 schools. but actually it severely restricts and censors Palestine. Teens who helped plan that event in LA are experiencing the censorship in the community as well as in the schools. And there are legislators here in Mass who are looking at California as a model of what we should be doing here in Massachusetts, something that I think is important to be aware of and may come up in the next legislative session. These stories illustrate that even among librarians who are supposed to be part of the first line of defense against censorship, some operate with a Palestine exception. And this brings me to IRA. Although it's not the only tool, it is a major tool used by a well-coordinated campaign to silence all teaching, learning, and discussion of Palestine and Palestinians. We might say, rather than the Palestine exception to censorship, it's more of a Don't Say Palestine campaign. In many ways, however, it's similar to right-wing campaigns to ban books and silence teaching and learning about race, gender, and sexuality. And there is overlap amongst the groups advocating around this censorship. By prohibiting criticism of Israel, Palestinian perspectives and lived experiences are erased through IRA. It operates under the racist assumption that Palestinians and Arabs are inherently violent and anti-Semitic. Anti-Palestinian racism is a form of racism that silences, excludes, erases stereotypes, defames, or dehumanizes Palestinians or their narratives, and includes allies as targets. Most of the rest of the talk, I'm going to share some examples of how IRA has been harmful to people, real people in the public schools in Massachusetts, students, teachers, and others. I'm not going to use towns or names or anything identifying, but these are all stories that have been shared with me. So I just want to say that. So the anti-Palestinian racism that underlies the push for IRA is already widespread in Massachusetts schools. Here are just a few examples of the racism and violence that one Palestinian family has experienced both in Palestine and here in Massachusetts. In the West Bank of Palestine, the father and his young son were held at gunpoint by Israeli soldiers while picking olives from a family farm near the apartheid wall. Another time, Israeli soldiers bombed their apartment door open, despite them pleading to be allowed to open the door. They were detained for hours at Israeli checkpoints across the illegally occupied West Bank with machine guns pointed at them, even though they had presented American passports. Then in Massachusetts, the school registered their children as Israeli, effectively erasing their Palestinian identities. A middle school cultural project one of the children's did on Palestine was censored and rejected by the teacher repeatedly because it included information about the Nakba and other historical events, along with some of the personal experience he faced in the West Bank that I just shared. All the student projects were displayed in the library during a culture festival, and parents were invited to the school to view them. This censorship not only disrespected and erased the students' experience in history, it also denied other students the opportunity to learn. Would this have happened if a student from Ukraine or Sudan had done a culture project? Would they have been told their experience weren't allowed, the history wasn't allowed? There are a few other examples of anti-Palestinian racism and the Don't Say Palestine playing out in Massachusetts schools in other ways. A student wore a sweatshirt to school that said, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Someone took a photo of the student wearing the sweatshirt and posted it on a community social media page. Parents pressured the principal to stop the student from wearing it to school. After a local rabbi stepped in, the principal decided to prohibit the student from wearing it. An educator was wearing a small accessory that had a map of historic Palestine on it while at school. Someone took a close-up photo of this accessory and anonymously posted it on a community social media page, identifying the educator by name in school. The educator was reported to administrators and the superintendent. A student who actively exercises his First Amendment rights by participating in protests, supporting Palestinians, and speaking out at school committee meetings and in other public forums has had local police repeatedly contact his principal and the superintendent. In one district, for 2 years in a row, students who were participating in their school's Day of Racial Justice were targets of public smear campaigns. The first year, a student who is not Palestinian spoke of how he connected with the suffering of people in Gaza and wanted to see peace for all the people there. This led to a multi-week campaign by adults to get him suspended, and his name was made public. The next year, a Palestinian student was selected to be one of the speakers, and that year they decided to pre-screen and pre-record the speeches because of what had happened the year before. This led to the head of a statewide Israel advocacy organization leading a campaign to have him excluded from the event. This campaign included a contentious school committee meeting where he was publicly named and where multiple adults spoke out against him. Some even called for students to walk out if he was allowed to speak. The student's mother also spoke and raised concerns over her son's safety at that meeting. She said, "Hearing adults call my teenage son barbaric, evil, anti-Semitic, and hateful on speech and action is disturbing, and at the very least, dangerous and honestly tantamount to child endangerment in the community where he lives and the school which he has to turn up every day to receive his education." She then said her son's speech would be about being silenced as a Palestinian student. So that kind of makes me want to cry a little bit when I read it. So Israel advocacy organizations pushing for IRA in K-12 schools, they're not only leading campaigns targeting students and educators, they're also working furiously to get control over curriculum and education about Israel and Palestine. ADL, Camera Education, and other groups like that offer lists of anti-Semitic, anti-Israel curriculum providers and materials. All of these lists include Palestine, and many of these lists, the providers also have other anti-racist education. That's why Palestine's in there. And here's an example of one success that they've had. For over 30 years, Brown University hosted Choices, an award-winning high school curriculum that helps students explore complex international issues from multiple perspectives. Just one of the 40 units is about the U.S. role in the Middle East, and it includes both Israeli and Palestinian perspectives, among many others. This curriculum has been targeted by those groups for several years, and last June, while Brown was being investigated for anti-Semitism and threatened with the loss of federal funding by the Trump administration, Brown University went and took the whole program down. It's not available anymore. It's not being sold, it's not being licensed, it's gone. There's tons of material in there about all kinds of different countries, and they use primary sources. They use primary sources from multiple perspectives, and it's been won many, many awards. Lots of schools used it. DESE has it as a high quality. The Department of Education in Massachusetts has a high quality choice on their website still. I don't know if they realize it's been taken down yet, but anyway. Professional development for educators, so I'm gonna talk just briefly about that. That professional development also is problematic. If it incorporates the IRA, that's another tool that's used to censor what is taught and discussed in classrooms regarding Palestine and Israel. Last fall, during a training for educators on anti-Semitism, a Jewish teacher who identifies as anti-Zionist was upset when his questions about the trainer's assertion that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic were dismissed. The trainer told him that he was in the minority as a Jewish anti-Zionist, and that his belief, Zionism is racism, was an anti-Semitic trope. Most of the teachers who attended the training reported feeling terrified to touch the topic of Israel or Palestine in classes after completing it. These advocacy organizations often paint teachers as enemies and simpletons who need to be controlled, rather than as professionals with education and expertise who can be trusted. And in addition to adopting the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, they are recommending other measures that Sarah spoke about. One of the most concerning ones is the anonymous reporting systems. We have anonymous posts doxing students on social media. We know that these kind of anonymous reporting systems will be used to bring harm to teachers, students, and others. So. And anonymous reporting systems are often abused, and students might just do it because they don't like a teacher. I mean, it's not a good method. So this climate of censorship is already having a detrimental impact on educators, and this is from talking to different teachers and just hearing what they have to say. Teachers are afraid to openly discuss what they're doing in the classroom. If they include materials from a Palestinian perspective, they kind of want to keep it underground and keep it hidden because they're afraid, they might not get away with it anymore. Teachers worry about units they've taught in the past that students have responded well to. For instance, a teacher who allows students to choose an article to read and analyze from among many articles includes one article about Gaza as an option. This year, the teacher was concerned the lesson might get them in trouble. There was a parent complaint. They decided to do it anyway, but there was a parent complaint. But their principal was supportive, so they're encouraged to keep the lesson. But that doesn't always happen. History teachers who teach standards regarding Israel and Palestine that are required. That's required in the state standards. The high school world history teachers are required to teach about the establishment of Israel and subsequent military and political conflicts. They have a lot of challenges with that. Those teachers who include information about the Nakba, illegal Israeli settlements, Israeli apartheid, and similar topics worry that they will get in trouble and even lose the ability to teach this information in the future. And lots of other teachers just self-censor. Some censor their students, as we heard earlier, and some even attempt to censor their peers and their other educators. Genocide education is especially impacted by censoring Palestine. Massachusetts passed a law requiring genocide education in middle and high schools in 2021. Numerous human rights organizations and scholars of genocide and the Holocaust have deemed Gaza a genocide. Not everyone agrees, but should Gaza be excluded from discussion and consideration in genocide education because some people do not agree? Shouldn't students be given opportunities to study and discuss one of the major questions of our time and draw their own conclusions based on evidence? That's what education is supposed to be about. True critical inquiry, an important skill for students to develop, is impossible under censorship. And I'm coming to the close, but so secondary English teachers often teach the Book Thief, a young adult historical novel that takes place in Nazi Germany during World War II. Suppose a teacher wants students to research another place today where people are suffering under a brutal regime. She has them start by going to the website of a well-respected, reputable human rights organization to explore and choose a place of interest, which is a common practice for engaging students in a research project, is to give them choice, let them explore. But the organization whose website she chose has been accused of anti-Semitism because it labeled Gaza a genocide. What if a student chooses Gaza because they've seen so much news about it on social media? Could that teacher get in trouble for allowing it? Should she censor the student and tell them to choose another topic if they do? Or should she just not use the website at all? Maybe she just shouldn't allow her students so much choice and should instead provide them with a small list of acceptable genocides to research and provide them with a small list of safe websites where Gaza isn't mentioned. If IRA is adopted and the state creates anonymous reporting systems and she allows her students to choose to research Gaza, she will be deciding to take a huge risk. Some teachers will do that, others will decide to censor. So what can we do to resist expanding the censorship and anti-Palestinian racism associated with IRA and K-12 schools? We can work to shift the focus away from the contemporary anti-Semitism of IRA, which is all about protecting Israel, to the actual anti-Semitism coming from the right wing and connect it to fighting other forms of bias such as racism, xenophobia, and discrimination against LGBTQ+ people. Students, supported by parents, educators, and administrators, can demand their First Amendment rights, civil rights, and right to learn, that those be upheld by the schools. Parents can organize within their communities to demand that their schools do not institutionalize anti-Palestinian racism by adopting IRA or other repressive measures and partner with teachers and their unions. Teachers' unions can support their members through negotiating for contract language, protecting their professional expertise and academic freedom, by filing grievances when appropriate, and by providing education and resources to help teachers navigate these difficult issues. Administrators and school committees can support educators and students by defending them against attacks instead of succumbing to pressure and censoring Palestine at school. In closing, the IRA definition and associated measures cause many problems in the K-12 classroom and school environment and solve none. The IRA fosters anti-Palestinian racism, censors teaching and learning, and should be resisted and rejected at every turn. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. And if anyone needs extra of these note cards or index cards to write questions, please raise your hands and we'll be right over there. I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Ben Idelson is a professor of law and affiliate professor of philosophy at Harvard University. He's a scholar of public law who focuses on issues at the intersection of law and philosophy. He teaches constitutional law, anti-discrimination law, and legal theory. He has written articles on anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, and Title VI, canons and textualism, race-conscious admissions, among other topics. His 2015 book, Discrimination and Disrespect, develops a moral theory on wrongful discrimination informed by legal examples. His writing for broader audiences has appeared in the New York Times, the Boston Globe, Slate, and other publications. Please take it away. Thank you.
Great. There we go. Great. So thank you for giving me a chance to share some thoughts with you about these really important issues that everyone's been talking about. I'm going to focus on three, and I'm going to try and do this in 20 minutes. So everything I'm going to talk about is complicated and nuanced, and I just want to say at the outset that there are nuances that are not going to be captured in what I say in the interest of compression. I don't think anything I'm going to say is misleading, but I don't want you to come away with a sort of oversimplified understanding of them, so I think it's important to say that at the outset. The first thing I'm going to touch on is how Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act conceives of discrimination. I think that's salient here especially because, as was mentioned, there's this pending complaint asking the Trump administration to impose the IRA definition on the Concord-Carlisle School District specifically in the name of Title VI, on the theory that that's required by Title VI, and that's not correct as a matter of law, and I want to briefly explain why. The second is to pause over this question of what the Massachusetts Special Commission to Combat Anti-Semitism did, and what its report says. I think that's been misunderstood in some quarters. I don't think it really does endorse the IRA definition as a proposal for a kind of speech code in schools, and I want to explain why. I think that that's important too. And then the third, and really the meatiest of these, those are both kind of negative, right? Those are like, people are telling you that Title VI requires IRA. It doesn't really. People are telling you that Massachusetts Special Commission recommended IRA. I don't think it really did. But then that leaves like an affirmative question of like, so how should schools and school districts draw the line between permissible free speech and kind of actionable or prohibited harassment or a hostile environment? I want to say a little bit about what the First Amendment and our anti-discrimination norms suggest about that question and give you kind of a model for thinking about it. Okay, see if I can do all that in 20 minutes. So this is just an excerpt of the complaint that I mentioned, which is asking, it's not just asking Concord-Carlisle to adopt IRA, it's asking the Trump administration to coerce Concord-Carlisle to adopt IRA by threatening to take away all federal funding unless the district does, which is kind of the signature tactic of the Trump administration. They've done that, as you know, to many universities, including mine as well. And the claim here by the Anti-Defamation League and others is that Concord-Carlisle needs to announce its commitment to utilizing the IRA definition for purposes of all of these various policies as required by law, and clarify that conduct falling within the IRA definition and examples will be considered discriminatory. Okay? So against that backdrop, I think it's important to understand what the law actually requires. This is just an advocacy document, and it's really, respectfully not correct. So Title VI prohibits discrimination on the ground of race or national origin. That's been interpreted to include Jewish ancestry as a race-like category. But discriminatory harassment under Title VI ordinarily requires intent, like targeting someone, as it says, on the ground of the protected characteristic, like for being Jewish, not just doing things that people experience as offensive in a way that they connect to their protected characteristic. That's important. There's some nuance about that I'm not getting into, but in terms of where the decided cases come out, that is generally the rule. Moreover, even where there is intent of the relevant kind, part of what protects against the kind of chilling effect that I think Sarah was talking about is an additional rule that the harassment has to be so severe and pervasive that it effectively denies somebody the opportunity to participate in the relevant program. So it's not supposed to be about, somebody said a thing in my history class that really upset me. It's supposed to be about a campaign of personal abuse targeting a particular person because of their protected characteristic. And the IHRA definition seems to go way beyond that, and so can't possibly be required by Title VI. Even the Trump executive order that purports to kind of tackle anti-Semitism and invokes the IHRA definition is actually kind of lawyerly. I mean, Donald Trump did not write this order. It says that actually the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education should consider the IHRA examples to the extent that any examples might be useful as evidence of discriminatory intent, meaning the legal standard remains what it always was, intent, basically, intent to do something to somebody because they're Jewish in this context. Insofar as the IHRA examples might be illuminating in some particular factual context as some evidence of whether that is the case or not, well, like relevant evidence is relevant evidence. But there's no presumption that doing something that is covered by one of the IHRA examples is, in fact, something that somebody's doing out of the prohibited intent. And the Office of Civil Rights, after this executive order, was sort of asked to clarify, so what is your position now about anti-Semitism, and what was he trying to say about IHRA and so on? And they made very clear, they said, an incident does not violate Title VI merely because it involves an example of anti-Semitism contemplated by the IHRA definition. Okay, so that is squarely at odds with what the ADL and the Brandeis Center and so on are saying is required by law. It's not even the Trump administration's position, really. Okay, that's the first point. Then there's a question of the Special Commission to Combat Anti-Semitism. Okay, and that, I think, is a compromise document that clearly was meant to satisfy multiple constituencies. Partly thanks to the work of some people here, I think it actually came out in a much more ambivalent and equivocal place than some people are claiming that it did. I think there sort of was a finessed, kind of wordsmithed report. And then some of the people on one side of that compromise, I see it as in their interest, understandably, to claim a much bigger victory out of the thing than I think it actually reflects. So what it does, in fact, is it says, when it gets around to defining anti-Semitism, it says anti-Semitism is a hatred of Jews for being Jewish. That's uncontroversial. I mean, that's the same intent-oriented standard that Title VI imposes. It doesn't say, like, opposition to the Jewish state is per se anti-Semitic when not motivated by hostility to Jews as Jews, okay? So it doesn't do that. It then says none of the prominent definitions that they go through, including IHRA, are appropriate for use in any regulatory enforcement regime, okay? So that is, again, squarely contradicting the ADL Brandeis Center complaint about Concord Carlisle. Even the Massachusetts Special Commission's position is IHRA is not appropriate for use in the way that the ADL is trying to use it. It then goes on to say, and this is sort of like where it gets kind of equivocal, it says that the commission embraces the IHRA definition as the most prominent of these various educational tools. That's like an awkward formulation, and it recommends that educators as someone said earlier, be informed of and by the IRA definition and the examples. Embracing something as the most prominent it's a funny phrase. It's like a clearly kind of lawyered sort of negotiated thing. So some people want to hear the commission embrace the definition, and they sort of get that. But on the other hand, they embrace it as what everybody can already agree it is, which is it is the most prominent. So it's just sort of recognizing an existing reality. It does not say, like, schools should adopt this as a speech code for their school. In fact, as I just said on the prior slide, it actually says schools should not do that, right? That it's not appropriate as a tool for regulatory enforcement. And then it says the IRA examples should not be taken as per se anti-Semitism, and that the commission also welcomes and appreciates these various other definitions, including the Nexus document, which specifically repudiates all of the most controversial implications of the IRA definition. So, presumably they think teachers should be informed of and by the Nexus document too. And this just kind of, I think, all comes out as a wash. So I would just urge, there's a strategic choice about, do you see the commission thing as a big threat that you organize against? Or do you read it for all it's worth and sort of enlist it on your side? And it really doesn't support what the ADL wishes it had said, basically. They are now just presenting it as having said. And I think if you engage with it more carefully, you'll find it really doesn't. Okay, so what then should a school actually do, or a school district actually do about this problem of defining anti-Semitism and setting limits on the bound of permissible speech around these sensitive issues? So the First Amendment does protect students from discipline for expressing a disfavored viewpoint. There's a famous line that students don't shed their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse gate, and that is still true. So that's a real constraint on schools, and parents who are concerned about this should invoke that. It's not an unlimited constitutional right, which makes sense, because you wouldn't think that kids should be able to say anything in a school without any consequence. And in particular, the most famous case about this is Tinker, and it sets the standard as schools can regulate speech when they have to avoid intrusion upon the rights of other students. There are some other exceptions too, but that's sort of the relevant one here. So Tinker is the case of the kids who wanted to wear black armbands to protest the Vietnam War. School says, no, that's really provocative. It's offending other kids. It's creating disorder of some kind in the school. People are distracted. And the Supreme Court says, kids have a right to wear the armbands. That's not enough. Just offending other kids is not a constitutionally permissible rationale for a school to suppress political expression. Okay, so that, at least on its face, would seem to apply just the same if it's not an armband, it's a keffiyeh, or it's a Palestinian flag. It's hard to see how those are distinguishable. But there is this real question of, well, when are you intruding upon the rights of other students? Because some harassment or bullying or whatever really does. In the First Circuit, which is the court just one level below the Supreme Court in the federal system that has jurisdiction over Massachusetts, has addressed that a bit. And one, reaffirmed that speech that's merely offensive to the listener is not enough to justify censorship, because that's really important. But at the same time says school administrators must be permitted to exercise discretion in determining when certain speech crosses the line from merely offensive to more severe or pervasive bullying or harassment. So a lot of deference to school administrators. Not complete deference, and Tinker is a clear anchor for that, but a lot of latitude for a school to decide for itself as a pedagogical matter what it thinks is intruding on the rights of other students. So then we have the question of well, how should a school exercise that discretion that's left to it? And I think there are really two principles that are helpful in informing that come out of the body of First Amendment case law. One, the First Circuit reiterated and I thought put nicely in this recent decision siding with MIT against some of these same groups that have been alleging the anti-Semitism based on criticism of Israel. The First Circuit says, one person does not lose the right to express a political opinion on a matter of public concern merely because another who expresses the same view does so for condemnable reasons, right? Meaning, the fact that some people say Israel is a genocidal state out of anti-Semitic hostility does not disqualify other people from saying Israel is a genocidal state, not out of that motivation, right? You kind of can't do, in First Amendment world, this guilt by association thing where a proposition becomes unsayable because some people say it for bad reasons. That's really important. And then the second, I took this articulation from a concurring opinion by Justice Alito a couple years ago, partly just to underscore that this is not like a left-wing thing. I don't think this really has any partisan valence. That's kind of the point. But he says, public school students, like all other Americans, have the right to express unpopular ideas on public issues, even when those ideas are expressed in language that some find inappropriate or hurtful. Public schools have the duty to teach students that freedom of speech, including unpopular speech, is essential to our form of self-government. Okay, so I think those two principles are helpful, and I want to now just kind of try to operationalize a little bit with some pictures what a regime, unlike the IRA one, that tried to respect those principles might look like. Okay, so the simplest case is you have one student and they are, in the ordinary colloquial sense, harassing another student for being Jewish. So like they say you, whatever, and there's like some slur, okay? And it's clearly about being Jewish, and it's targeted at the person for being Jewish. Like that's why A is doing this to B. That's easy. Schools don't have to permit that. First Amendment doesn't protect that, let's suppose, just to simplify. Okay, modestly more complicated, but I don't think that much more complicated. A says something about Jews as a class, okay? So they're no longer like talking about B specifically, but they are still talking about B when they say this thing about Jews as a class, some hostile, derogatory, demeaning, stereotypical thing. And they're intending to be talking about B among others. And the among others doesn't get A off the hook for it being harassment, okay? That's also, I think, a pretty simple, straightforward case. I think the harder case, or the case that a lot of this controversy is really about, is A is saying something about Israel. That's just the seal of the state of Israel, okay? Or they're saying something about Zionism, understood as the belief that there should be a Jewish state in a particular territory or something like that, or a state in which Jews have certain special status, okay? They're saying something, let's say, really hostile and derogatory about that institution, okay? Meanwhile, B and some other people really identify with that institution as Jewish, right? That's what those green arrows are supposed to represent. And so B does that, another Jewish student does that, and notably, there's a third student there who actually, for them, that's not Jewishly significant to them. That's not an important part of their Jewish identity, okay? The real question, I think, posed by all of this IRA stuff and that schools are struggling to navigate is what obligation does A incur vis-a-vis B by dint of this indirect connection between them? The fact that A is saying something really hostile about a thing in which B is really invested, and invested kind of as a Jewish person, right? That's different than the other cases because it's mediated in this way. But the question is yeah, but doesn't the fact that B really cares about this Jewishly matter? And can that make what A said anti-Semitic? Okay, and I think the gist of the First Amendment inflected answer, if you think about those two principles that I articulated before, is that doesn't count, right? And that's not a Jewish thing. That would be true for other structures and groups too. So just to make that explicit, imagine this was instead the Catholic Church. That's just the symbol of the Catholic Church. And A is saying something, again, not about Catholics, that would be the prior case, right? But about the Catholic Church. They say the Catholic Church is corrupt, or they say the Catholic Church is complicit in child abuse. Okay? These are not things I'm saying, to be clear, but imagine that the student says that, okay? And then student B is really offended, because for them, the Catholic Church is a sacred thing, and people shouldn't lightly say such things about it, okay? It really bothers them, sincerely, authentically. Same analysis applies, right? There's nothing Jewish specific about it. The rule should be the same for both of those cases. And in both of those cases, I think the rule that comes out of those principles we talked about is something like A should aspire to sensitivity toward B. Like, and as a pedagogical matter, it would be a good thing for schools to inculcate a capacity for A to appreciate, wait a minute, the thing I'm criticizing is really important to some other people, and important in a way that they experience as linked to their ethnic or religious identity. I should tread a little carefully here. Like, I don't need to be needlessly provocative and hurtful, okay? But at the same time, it's not anti-Semitic harassment if it's about Israel and not about Jews. It's like actually pretty simple in that way. It's not a basis for censorship. It's like a basis for maybe aspiring to civility, but not the kind of harassment that you could justify prohibiting. Because, back to those two principles, and then I'll be done, one of them was the fact that some people say the thing out of a bad motive can't be a reason for disabling other people from saying it, right? So we can't assume here that just because some people say these nasty things about Israel because they hate Jews, that A is doing it for that reason. We can't presume that, consistent with the First Amendment. And second, we can't take the fact that B is offended as inherently imposing a gag rule on A. Like, a view has to be sayable, even if some people are offended by it. That's what Justice Alito was pointing out in the passage I read to you before. So I think when you put those together, you have to accept some version of this picture, though obviously there's a lot of nuance to work out about it. And I think what bothers people about the IRO definition, rightly, is that it does not seem to recognize the complexity of this structure. It seems to want to assimilate everything to basically this, right? Like whatever you quote, you fill in there, if it's about Israel, if it's about Zionism, somehow it becomes about Jews and can be treated as such and prohibited on that basis. And I do think that's inconsistent with both First Amendment law and the kind of set of anti-discrimination values that we should be trying to realize and navigate in tandem with those First Amendment considerations. Okay.
So I'm excited to welcome our next speaker. Rachel Gore-Fried is a human rights lawyer, community organizer, and social justice educator. Rachel serves as the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee Vice President, a global human rights organization where she leads UUSC's creative and effective approach to supporting communities organizing in the face of systemic injustice and complex humanitarian crises. With ancestral ties in South Asia, Rachel's career has been built through weaving relationships with activists and advocates across borders. Rachel is an adjunct professor at Northeastern University Law School and is co-leader of the Carlisle Public School Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Community Advisory Council, as well as the Concord Carlisle Solidarity Initiative. So I hope we'll all join me in welcoming Rachel to the stage.
Thank you, everyone. I'm inviting our esteemed panel to come join me. As my role I feel like we're in the seventh inning stretch here. We need like a little bit of body movement. I know it's been a long night. You've heard a lot. There's a lot to think about. And while they set up, I hope everyone had a chance to get the flashcards with the questions. And I'm going to get those in a few minutes. I'm just going to be picking into the hat and grabbing kind of whatever comes up first. And we'll try to get through as many questions as we can within the time that we have left. So I'm going to be super quick. First, I just want to thank all of you all for coming out to Concord tonight. It really means a lot to have this kind of grounding and understanding, and to have this opening of dialogue here in our community. And I appreciate how values-oriented the conversation has been, both around the values that many of us hold true around education, the values of embracing multiple truths, and understanding the complexity of the topic that we are hearing about today, and the help in understanding and education to us around anti-Palestinian racism and how that manifests, because that conversation hasn't been as alive in our community in the last several months. I also just really want to thank the audience who has come here tonight. You are all valued members of this community with your own lived experience. Some of you may have come here believing that you would share the same perspectives as many of the speakers spoke to tonight. Some of you may agree with some of it, but you're questioning others and you're not so sure, but you showed up here anyways. And some of you might have come here concerned about the dialogue, but you came, you all showed up, you listened, you engaged with multiple truths. And the most important thing for all of us who are in the audience here today is that we are neighbors. We are many neighbors in this community, and we all have different lived experiences. And tonight has really been about fostering understanding. And I think, what we've seen tonight, that this debate and dialogue is not as much about the definition itself, but it's about the implementation of the definition. And it's about the examples that were shared. And those are examples that have been shared outside of our school district, and there are some that have been shared that have impacted our school district, and have impacted students across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. As it was mentioned, I'm a human rights lawyer, and I work for the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. You might know the UUs. They're always in the yellow robes, and always talking about standing on the side of love. And so for me, it's been tough to see the way that IRA has been implemented to critique and silence progressive human rights organizations. So I've seen that firsthand for the last several years, working at the national level. And seeing organizations have to fight that fight and stand for their values. And these are organizations that stand for the human rights of all people. Then locally, I've seen this become an issue here in our community. I've seen it sort of isolate Palestinian people in our community, Jewish community members, and Arab community members and teachers. And it's also caused harm. So just bringing this right back to our community in Concord, in Carlisle, I have heard directly from many students and parents of students about discrimination students have faced for their viewpoints. These are often viewpoints around Palestinian freedom and human rights, but it's also discrimination for people for their identity or their religion. I've also heard of examples of intimidation of our community members, and I've heard about examples of baseless accusations of anti-Semitism against fellow community members. In fact, multiple community members in this room were reported to Canary Mission for voicing opinions about Palestinian freedom, or showing a movie, or writing about the Anti-Defamation League. And this is an organization that doxes people on the black web, and that it
actually ruins people's reputations and causes them physical safety issues. As you can imagine, this is especially scary. It's an especially hard time to be in the field of human rights, especially with the growing authoritarianism in our country, where ICE agents don't really have any accountability. And the disproportionate impact of that falls on Black people and on people of color, make no mistake. IHRA and this question of how to really think about its implementation has actually created division and fear. It's criminalized solidarity, and it erases identity and privileges one harm over another. I think that there are alternatives in our community that we want to fight together anti-Semitism from an intersectional approach that does not cause harm to one community over another, and that is grounded in safety through solidarity. Thank you again for coming tonight. I am now going to receive the questions. I think they're making their way to me. I will take them one by one. All right. Okay, the first question, and I'm actually going to ask maybe two people can offer to answer it, but if you all feel really passionately about it, we can hear from each of you. But just to try to get through more questions, maybe we try to take it from two people. Does the First Amendment allow saying Somalis are animals of thieves? Yes. Oh, I want to come over here and sit with you all. I could just stand in the back, it's okay.
Right, so just to clarify, the First Amendment itself allows saying anything. Like the question really is, what restrictions on speech does the First Amendment forbid a government entity from imposing? Okay, so I take the question to be, if somebody says that, and a school wants to censor them or discipline them, does the school violate the First Amendment by doing so? And I think the answer is, I have a colleague who got in a lot of trouble for saying exactly this. It depends on the context. But that's just true. So, if it's part of a campaign of personal abuse and harassment of a Somali peer, then it could certainly amount to a hostile environment in the way that Title VI is concerned about, and it could constitute intrusion on the rights of the other student in the way that the First Amendment cases recognize as limiting the free speech rights of the speaker. I think probably if a school made a kind of pedagogical judgment that for them that was over the line of bullying, the courts would uphold that, and that would be permitted under the First Amendment. If you want to assimilate that to my slides, it's basically like the second one, right? It's about Somalis as a class. It's directed at like a Somali person. It's a form of harassment or abuse of that person, assuming a lot of facts in the context that, I don't mean to say are universally present or absent.
Great, thank you. Thanks for explaining that to us. I'm going to move to the next question. I'm suddenly reminded of the teachers trying to read my scribbled notes to them every morning about my children's dismissal plan. If a Jewish student is verbally accused of being an Israel supporter simply because they are Jewish, is that anti-Semitic, specifically thinking of the trope that a Jew
is responsible for the ways of all Jews?
It may be anti-Semitic, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's illegal, or that it's a very complex line between somebody saying that and what is the context in which they said. If the Jewish student has said Israel is justified in the killing of 70,000 people in Gaza, the retort, well, then you're responsible. It may not be nice, but it's certainly it is a response. And could it be considered anti-Semitic? Possibly. I know that's very vague, but I think this is such complicated ground, and context is everything.
Professor Idleson, I see
So,
you.
again, a lot depends on context. My instinct about that is that it is, anti-Semitic is such a fraught and kind of unhelpful word, in my opinion, about that. It is inappropriate, it is wrong, it is stereotyping of a morally inappropriate kind. It's a basis, potentially, for appropriate school response, including, we don't do that around here. We don't impute to people political opinions on the basis of ethnic characteristics. And we wouldn't do that whether it was assuming something about somebody's attitudes towards the actions of another state on the basis of any, heritable, immutable characteristic. Like, there's nothing sort of special about the anti-Semitism. You don't need the IRA thing for any of that. I don't think it doesn't sound like it rises to the level of bullying or harassment that, if the school didn't adequately respond to it, could put the school in violation of Title VI. But, kids say all kinds of gross things to each other, sometimes implicating their protected characteristics. And this, to me, sounds like one of them. So I don't mean to say it's okay, but that doesn't mean also that it's a basis for suspension or suspending the funding to the school or any of the things that in our current context, unfortunately, even kind of localized interpersonal disputes become kind of occasions for these disproportionate responses.
Thank you. I'm going to move to the next question. When the special commission says it recommends that educators be informed of and by the IRA definition, what does inform by mean if not suggesting adoption of that definition?
Maybe I should respond. Okay, well, interesting question. I mean, the Trump executive order is a good reference point for that, right? So it says the agency's assessments should be informed by this list of things that, in the view of this association, often or at least sometimes instantiate a certain attitude. But it's not like if you did one of these things, then you did something anti-Semitic. Even the executive order doesn't take that position. So I read that part of the report, and it's pretty short, so you could read it for yourself. I read it to say, basically, we don't like definitions of anti-Semitism. We think they're problematic in all sorts of ways. We think they're best understood as teaching tools. Here's a perspective. I think it even says, one of the great things about them is they spark conversation. Okay, so a teacher could be informed by this, as in here's a view about that some fraction of the at least organized Jewish community holds about what's anti-Semitic. And here are a bunch of other views that are flatly inconsistent with it, right? Which they also say they welcome and support. So I take it to be like a soup, and it's saying here's a thing that's worth reading, thinking about. But it's not the kind of language you would use to say, this should be your speech code. I think if that was the position that the commission was prepared to take, they would have written something other than with this long preamble. It should be something that informs teachers' practice.
So even though it says informed by and it's not a legal document, I think a lot of educators will take that to mean this, you're supposed to use it. And also in the professional development section, they talk about that professional development for educators should be informed by the examples in IRA as well. So again, by frightening teachers into thinking that they have to follow this, again, those teachers who are terrified to say anything about Israel and Palestine after going to professional development about anti-Semitism. So it's not always like a legal thing where, if Department of Education says to do something, districts usually will do it. It's a very top-down system, so sometimes I don't know the legal challenges, those can go on a long time, but they can get people to comply through language and through those sorts of things that you see in there. So I just want to say that, because that's how it actually operates in the schools that I've seen.
And I also just wanted to briefly add to that is that, I think it's really interesting, the points that you've brought up of how we might argue it, right? Kind of in this kind of neutral or sterile setting, or not sterile, but you know what I mean. But what's also in the report is what we're going to do when you get it wrong. And those consequences are really high. And so this vagueness on one side is really possibly part of the design. And you could see it as a compromise. That's one way to look at it. I think the other way to look at it is the national trends that say that this is by design and the punishments are high and that relationship is a reason. So I think holding that as well is true, is that you're not going to be in this delightful soup of let's consider all the possibilities when you could lose your job. You could be anonymously reported, and this same commission suggests piloting that immediately.
Can I just comment on that? I think these are both important, and I don't disagree with anything either of you said. So just to be clear, there are different questions one might ask. One is, what does the commission report require of me? And to the extent the commission report has some authority, rhetorically or otherwise, people are pointing to it in their petition to adopt the IRA thing and saying, well, look, the commission, we had a whole commission in Massachusetts about anti-Semitism, and they said do this, okay? Like, I'm saying it's important to understand that's not correct, okay? And it's like worth explaining to those people that they're wrong about that, okay? Like, it weakens the argument, okay? That is totally compatible with, I think, the really important point you're making, which is, like, having any of these standards like exist as these like loaded weapons out there to be invoked by anonymous complaint processes because somebody didn't like somebody's history class is a really dangerous thing in our political context, even if on the merits the teacher didn't do anything wrong. So it's important both to understand whether the teacher did anything on the merits wrong, and I'm saying the report doesn't really suggest that they did, and also the harms of having a standard or an institutional apparatus that could be deployed to punish them even though they didn't do anything wrong. And I think those are totally compatible.
Thank you all. This is another question for you, Professor Idelson. It's, okay, you make a pervasive argument that anti-Israelism and anti-Zionism are not anti-Semitism. But isn't he negating the examples given by the previous speaker, Sue Doherty, that is, IRA has been weaponized against Palestinians?
I think I am not doing that. I mean, I don't mean that to be dismissive, but I certainly wouldn't want to do that. And I don't see the tension between so maybe I'm just not getting the point of the question. I don't know, do you?
You seem to support what I was saying by your example of the diagram, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, the diagram I thought was really helpful to show that it's not, it has been weaponized that way, but the diagram helps clarify, and some more administrators should be looking at that.
And I want to add, in your diagram, there were 3 arrows going down to the seal, the state of Israel. Only 2 of them, though, seem to be actually pointing out. That is, many of those same statements are made by Jews.
Right.
So that is, unless you want to say Jews who would make those statements are anti-Semitic, then, which is what is said, but it is logically impossible to sort of wrap one's brains around that. Jews have and have had just a range of opinions about this subject, and many of those individuals are deeply committed, observant Jews, and whose lives are very much caught up with their Jewish commitments. So to make that elision, okay, if you say that you're an anti-Semite or you are engaging in anti-Semitism, is in a sense flies in the face of the presence of Jews, or that there are Jews making that same argument.
Thank you all. We've got one last question. I feel bad. There's a whole bag full of questions here, and maybe we can brainstorm how to get some of the other questions answered. But the lucky green. The legal framework was excellent. How do we use this info to protect our students and teachers in response to the specific incidences in our school system? Example, can we use the argument of discriminatory treatment if a school censors one voice to protect another?
Well, I'm glad you find it helpful. So on the most specific aspect of that question at the end, yes. So the thing that the First Amendment is most strongly applied to and the courts are most kind of vigilant about is what they call viewpoint discrimination. So that's a special kind of speech regulation. Some speech regulation is content discriminatory in the sense of like, this forum is only for, math class, and you can't do history here. I don't know, I'm in a school context, but, or like billboards on these public roads have to be about certain topics. There's certain topics we're just not going to have billboards about that. Okay, that's content discrimination, and it's subject to one set of standards that are pretty strict, but not super strict. Viewpoint discrimination is like, even as to a given topic, like you can say X, but you can't say not X, right? Or like, even the cases that are pretty friendly to school administrators' discretion to make policy for a school call out that viewpoint discrimination is different. So Tinker, the Vietnam War case, includes a whole discussion of the fact that people who had other sort of political symbols and whatever were not censored, and says like clearly the thing we know even in a school context is the First Amendment doesn't allow officials to pick out the one disfavored view and ban that. So to the extent that you can say that's what's happening in your school, that's a good argument, and you should invoke the First Amendment on your side, because it is on your side.
Anyone else want to speak to this? I think we have to conclude. Thank you for being so open with all these questions. It's been a pleasure to be here with you tonight. And just checking. Should I just, okay. Yeah, thank you very much for being with us again tonight. Thank you all. And thank you to our organizers. I do want to say thank you to Maren and for organizing this panel.